good to be back in the lovely city of Columbia, Tennessee. It is good to see all of these familiar faces, and it's good once again to turn our attention to our song worship and just what it is that we need to be considering as we worship. We're going to be in Lesson 6 this morning, so if you turn there in your lesson books, that is what our subject will be. And before we go any further, Bradley, would you mind leading us in prayer?
We pray, Father, as we spend this time in this class that will help us in the future as we always enter into song services to more fully understand what we're singing in praise to you and what we're teaching ourselves and others in those songs. We pray, Father, that we'll always do so that will make our worship and our service more useful in your sight. We're thankful that we can always worship you, and we look forward to these first days of the week when we can be together. As our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, brother. All right. Derek, would you mind bringing up, there should be a slide presentation for this week in my folder. We're going to begin here this morning, as we customarily do, by looking at a statement in great big bold letters. That is something that I think is true about our song worship together, and is something that is important for us to understand. While he's doing that, there's something else that I want to talk about before we get into the main part of our study. I was passing the workbook that I'd written around some of my hymn writer friends, and one of the comments that somebody made is that it might be that somebody would look at these things and be concerned that what I am advocating is for kind of a high church style of worship, you know, with the pipe organs and the robes and all that stuff. And if anybody has any questions about that, especially when we are talking about the hymns that have been written recently that I like, if you have questions about that, go to YouTube and look for the official videos of these, because all of them will have official YouTube videos. And if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about a hymn called All Praise to Him. If you go and look that up on YouTube, what you will find is a bunch of dudes standing around on stage with guitars and drums and that kind of stuff. And obviously that we would have questions about the way that they're choosing to worship. But does that sort of thing sound very stuffy and formal and high church to you? No, that's not high church. That's kind of the opposite, in fact. And so what we're talking about here is not that old is good or new is good, not that high church is good or low church is good. It's stuff that helps us to worship the way that God intends for us to worship is what is good. All right, so we have our slide up, and this morning's offering is that a good hymn without good music is like faith without works. And what is faith without works like? It is dead. And so too, if you have a good hymn, and by hymn I mean the words, if you have good words for a hymn, but they aren't paired with good music, with really stirring, inspiring music, then that too is going to be dead. Why would that be true? Because I guarantee you this is true. A lot of these are just sort of my opinion. This is fact. Why is that true? Why is a good, worthy text with a boring tune not going to be sung? Don?
First thing that pops in my mind is that it becomes insipid. It's just like a good meal. We've got all the right vegetables, meat, whatever, but there's no seasoning anywhere in it, and it's just really,
That's a really interesting comparison there, Don. Because what Don just said is that it's kind of like if somebody cooked a meal and didn't use any spices. And so even if you're using good, wholesome ingredients that will nourish you, is a meal like that going to taste very good? No, it's not. That we rely on that flavor to make what we're eating more palatable. So I think that's a great comparison. I see other comments. Dave?
I mean, singing is something that most people enjoy. It doesn't matter how bad or how good they are, they enjoy it. And a song that's written, the content may be good, but if the music to it is maybe boring, or music is something that doesn't, pull, music can pull the words, and then music can help drive the emotion. But if it's something that's pretty much stays on two notes the entire time, it's going to be forgettable, and you're not going to enjoy it.
I think that's exactly right. What Dave said is that simply because of the way that we're created, human beings enjoy singing. If you just see some little 3-year-old kid tripping along, they're going to be singing, right? It's something that seems to be innate in us, is that we love to sing. And that for us, singing is an emotional activity. So if you have a tune that is boring and just kind of blah and not emotionally stirring, then that's something that's not going to be appealing to people. It's like Don's meal with no spices in it. And if we don't like to sing stuff like that we look at the words and say, that these words are like broccoli, they're good for me, but I really don't like singing this, is that really a negative reflection on us? Is that where the problem lies? Or does that reveal a problem in that tune instead? Yeah, it's the tune. And obviously, to some extent, our tastes are going to differ, that some of us will like some music better than others, but there's still a bell curve there. And it is generally true that the hymns that we sing in worship are paired with good tunes. And the reason why that is important for us to consider is bound up in the fact that we're commanded to sing. Now, God doesn't command us to chant together, does he? Or to, read the same Bible text together in unison. We're called to sing. And that's because God knows that emotional component of singing is important. And so if there is this hymn that doesn't tap into the emotion, then it's just not a good hymn.
I think part of that too is the match between words and tune. If you have a happy, upbeat set of words paired with a really slow, somber tune, the feeling of that is not going to be happy no matter what you're singing about. The feeling is going to be sad and somber. And the reverse is true too. If you have a hymn about the crucifixion paired with really peppy, upbeat music, that's going to feel happy and upbeat, even if you're singing about the crucifixion. And even if we can't put our finger on why, that mismatch is going to sour us on that set of words so that we can't use them well.
That's a great point. What Lauren just said is that sometimes it's not even just the tune, sometimes it's the match between the tune and the hymn. And that if those are mismatched, then the result is not going to be appealing. Like, for instance, let me give you an example. I think all of us know the hymn, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. That's paired in our hymnal with this really slow, majestic, moving music, right? We enjoy singing that because the words and the music go together. But in the 19th century, there was a hymn tune composer named Ira Sankey who wrote new music to When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, because he thought that the tune that we sing is all slow and boring and stuff. And this one was really peppy. It was call and response. It was, when I survey, the wondrous cross, the wondrous cross. And you know, it sounded like carnival music. Would you like to sing When I Survey the Wondrous Cross to carnival music? No, it was a horrible mismatch, which is why we still sing the same tune that Ira Sankey didn't like. So, you know, that is part of the art too, is making sure that the mood of the tune reinforces the mood of the hymn. Dave.
It's 2 points. So one is music can be a double-edged sword here. If it's wrong, the wrong kind of music, especially kind of not much to it, it's very distracting. It can be distracting. That's going to prevent you. But if it's written in a way which only 3 or 4 people in the congregation of 200 can sing it, it's a distraction. And to go with your last point, I've heard Amazing Grace. It's been people have put Amazing Grace to the Yellow Rose of Texas. The theme from Gilligan's Island changes everything. You don't hold it like it does.
I think that's right. And a couple of things that Dave said there. I'll start with the one I can deal with quickly first. And that is that when we think about Amazing Grace, I think many of us have at one point or another heard Amazing Grace put to the tune for Gilligan's Island. And that just makes the whole thing unserious, doesn't it? And it should be something that is significant, but when you put it to da 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 da, then it is no longer serious. It's a terrible mismatch. But the other thing that Dave said is, on the one hand, you can have music that is so simple that it is uninteresting and it's a distraction. On the other hand, you can also have music that is so complicated that it is a distraction. And I think that is a great point, and that's one that we need to dwell on a little bit. Because I think that's true, especially with a lot of the hymns that are coming into the church from the denominational world these days. Just to name a name. I think probably most of us have heard of Chris Tomlin. He's a very, very famous Christian contemporary music singer. Who's a better singer, me or Chris Tomlin? Yeah, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Go ahead. Who's a better singer than 95% of us in this room, Chris Tomlin or us? And so just because Chris Tomlin can sing it, he sounds really awesome as he's powering up there to that G in the soprano. Does that mean that the congregation should try to sing it? And so I think that is well stated, Dave, is that when we are, especially for song leaders, if a song leader is looking at what he is wanting to put before the congregation, he needs to consider the musical capacity of the congregation that he's trying to lead in worship. Because if the music is too hard, then people will be so caught up in focusing on the difficulty of it that they won't be able to pay attention to the worship. Landon?
Going back to your story of changing the tune to When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, we're seeing, or I observe a number of examples of writers today wanting to go back and rearrange old hymns, and that can be very difficult for congregations as well, because the power of music is that it leaves a mark in your mind, that once it's there and you've sung a song the same way over and over again, it's very hard for you to remove that and relearn it. And so it's important to have good music, and if you're going to change an old hymn, it needs to be a dramatic improvement, or else just leave it alone.
That's an interesting point. What Landon is talking about is when it comes to making worship more difficult, and he observes correctly, and this is actually not a new thing, but it is certainly something that is done today, is when you will have a contemporary composer or musician who will take a familiar hymn and a familiar tune and somehow add to or rearrange that. Now, that's not a practice that I'm either going to say is straight up a good thing or straight up a bad thing. Because, for instance, in our hymnals, the hymn called We're Marching to Zion, that's one that we know, that's one that we sing, that's one that we know that we like, right? But how many people know how the thing that is on the page in our hymnal came to be? Anybody ever, studied the author and the composer? Where that one came from is I can't tell you to check the hymnal because we don't have hymnals right now. But if you did, what you would see is that the text to the verses was written by Isaac Watts back in like 1707 or something. And then fast forward, 150 or more years, and you get to a guy named Robert Lowry. And what Robert Lowry did is he took those verses and he wrote a different tune to them, and to go with the tune, he added a chorus. That we're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. That's not Isaac Watts, that's Robert Lowry. So this is somebody who back in 1870 was doing this same thing, who was taking an existing hymn and augmenting it or adapting it. And, for myself, I am glad that Robert Lowry did that, because I think We're Marching to Zion, as it is in our repertoire, is really strong. But when we're talking about Robert Lowry, we are also talking about one of the most talented writers of all time. We're talking about the guy who wrote Low in the Grave He Lay. We're talking about the guy who wrote the tune to I Need Thee Every Hour. I mean, just wonderful stuff, because he was really good. And so if you're Robert Lowry and you say to yourself, I can adapt this and make it better, then, by all means go too. But if you're not Robert Lowry, if your ambitions exceed your abilities, then probably you are better off leaving the old stuff alone, because you might make it different and you might sell albums, but you're probably not going to make it better. So that is where I come down on all of that, Landon. And I think we're in the same place, that it's a great big it depends. But some of those work, but by no means do all of those work. Any other thoughts here? All right then. Well, let's move on to look at our two hymns for the day. We are back to playing A or B, like in the optometrist's office. Let's see, let me grab the clicker so I can advance it myself. I forgot to do that. I'm out of practice here. And there is our first hymn. Who would like to read this for us? This unique composition called Lord of the Dance. Any volunteer to read? All right, Bobby, read it.
Danced in the morning when the world was begun, and I danced in the moon and the stars and the sun, and I came down from heaven, and I danced on the earth. At Bethlehem I had my birth. Dance then wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. I danced for the scribe and the Pharisee, but they would not dance and they wouldn't follow me. I danced for the fishermen, for James and John. They came with me, and the dance went on. I danced on the Sabbath, and I cured the lame. The holy people said it was a shame. They whipped and they stripped, and they hung me on high, and they left me there on a cross to die. I danced on a Friday when the sky turned black. It's hard to dance with the devil on your back. They buried my body, and they thought I'd gone, but I am the dance, and I still go on. They cut me down, and I leapt up high. I am the life that'll never, never die. I'll live in you if you'll live in me, I am the Lord of the dance, said he.
All right, thank you, Bobby, for reading Lord of the Dance for us. By the way, I did not make this up. This is really, really famous. If you go on YouTube and look at sort of the official version, it has 1.5 million views. So this is a thing. But let's move on and talk instead about Ah, Holy Jesus. Who would like to read this? Volunteer to read Ah, Holy Jesus. It is shorter. Joe, thank you, brother.
Ah, Holy Jesus, how have you offended? That moral judgment has on you descended, by foes derided, by your own rejected, O most afflicted. What was the guilty who brought this upon you? It is my treason, Lord, that has undone you. 'Twas I, Lord Jesus. I was denying you. I crucified you. Lo, the good shepherd, for the sheep is offended, the slave has sinned, and yet the Son has suffered. For my atonement, thought I nothing heeded, God interceded. Therefore, dear Jesus, since I cannot pay you, I do adore you and will ever pray you. Think on your pity and your love unswerving, not my deserving.
Right. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so here we are again. We are comparing these two and saying not necessarily something is absolutely good or absolutely bad, but which one is better? Which one is more suited for our worship? Is it A here or is it B here? Which one of these do we think is more suitable for our congregations? B or A? A or B? Anybody want to take a stab? Don.
It's mouthy. I think B.
Don takes B, and I see nods. And why B, Don?
I understand the wording very well, and if I would replace the word dance with rejoiced, it is infinitely better. I know that Christ rejoiced so very, very much. I cannot pull up any instance of him having danced. And it is Christ who is narrating this tune. And to me, it doesn't fit. And it's not that I see dancing as wrong. I just see it infinitely out of place here.
Thank you, Don. What Don said is that when deciding between B and A, his big problem with A is that all the way through A, we see Jesus dancing. And that's just very odd because, you know, as I'm with Don. I cannot remember a single place in Scripture where we see Jesus dancing. The closest that I get is that there was music and dancing in the parable of the prodigal son. That's as close as I get. And yet this has Jesus described as the Lord of the dance. And so, is there lots of good content in those verses? You know, I mean, lots of true stuff about how the Pharisees rejected Jesus and the humble fishermen accepted Jesus, and how he was killed by his enemies and how he rose from the dead. So there is lots of good stuff. But then in every verse, you've got dancing Jesus. You had a comment, Lyndon?
It's a little bit different from some of the others that we've looked at that were maybe not as strong because, you know, it brings to mind Matthew 11:17, where Jesus talked about, you know, this generation he was dealing with being like children, you know, who played a song and wouldn't dance. And so, especially when it talked about the Pharisees not dancing, it kind of reminded me of that. But I don't have an example of Jesus dancing Lord of the Dance makes me think Lord of the Flies or that Irish guy who used to dance.
Michael
So
Flatley.
there's a lot I like.
Yes. I guarantee you that Michael Flatley knew or knows, is he still alive? Well, whichever. That when he described himself as Lord of the Dance, he was referring to this hymn. That he meant that blasphemously. But so I'm with you, Lynn, and there are references to dancing throughout the Gospels, but to the point where you could describe Jesus as Lord of the Dance, we've kind of gone beyond. Ben?
First of all, I just want to say you should never admit that you know the actual name of that guy. The Lord of the Dance. You should never admit that.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Although I am like the storehouse of useless information.
That's true. You have a great memory. I was going to say, honestly, for me, this is a less bad versus worse situation. I don't love either one of these songs. The first one, A, as we're calling it, I find irreverent and flippant because of its content. I feel there was an agenda there where somebody was just trying to cram dancing down our throat. But it has a lot of, like you guys already talked about, has a lot of good actual scriptural content. Other than that, we could somehow alter the lyrics a little bit, adapt it, and make it into a decent song. It's got a decent rhyming scheme. That's really the second song. It doesn't have bad content. It just feels clunky. It feels forced. Anytime that you have to put the word unswerving into a song to make it rhyme with something else, you're trying too hard.
Yes.
So it's a difficult choice for me, but I have to go with I have to go with B being better, just because I find A irreverent.
Yes. And that's a really interesting point. We'll explore that. That when you look at B, I agree with you that what you see in B is not really like straightforward natural language the way that we would talk to each other. So, that has to be counted against it. But when you're talking about A, the problem is not that the content is hard to understand. The problem is that the content is very easy to understand. And we like the subsidiary content. We like the narrative about the life of Jesus, but we don't like we don't like all the dancing. Dave?
Saying flipping on this for A, didn't care for it at all. Then when we got to I danced on the Sabbath, to me that was complete. My feeling is, complete disregard for the old law. If you're saying that the way, just because of the way it dances, to me it just puts it down even where like I'm so much better. Christ is better, but it's just the context of that is made it. That's still the deal.
Well, that's an interesting point, Dave. What Dave said is that when you were talking about A, the thing that killed it for him was when he got to the line about dancing on the Sabbath. And just to kind of paraphrase what I understood you as saying, to Dave, that just absolutely trivialized what Jesus did on the Sabbath. And, all of these significant debates throughout the ministry of Jesus about Jesus healing on the Sabbath. And, these wondrous works of power in describing this with something as frivolous as dancing.
Showing who he was by saying dancing was I'm better.
Yes.
It just makes it a complete joke.
Yes. That you take something that should be really serious and it trivializes it. Bobby?
I don't know Sidney Carter. I don't know exactly what was going on in his mind. But somehow in the recesses of my memory, the word dance is kind of like a different word for life. And I don't know where I got that, but it could be in my, I grew up in the 60s. I don't know. But there's something about, I don't know if it's as literal as dance or as it is of the life is a a dance or something equal. And I'm not
Yes.
saying that's what he meant. I'm just saying that's where my mind kind of went.
What Bobby is saying, that as she read this, that she almost sort of was inserting life or something like that as she was going through and reading dancing, and she's trying to figure out if there is something in the 60s that kind of has that implication. And what your words bring to my mind, Bobby, is there is a Christmas carol that may be as old as the Middle Ages, called "Tomorrow Shall Be My Dancing Day." Anybody else heard of this? No one else knows this obscure Christmas carol. But I think that that is probably part of what's going on here. That this very old thing compared the day of Jesus' birth to Jesus starting to dance. So that connection is out there. But the other thing that I think is going on is that the tune that this is paired to. How many of y'all know Appalachian Spring? The Aaron Copland, music. Some wavering. What that is originally based on is a Shaker hymn called "Simple Gifts" that Aaron Copland took and made into a ballet. So it might be that the reason why Sidney Carter went with Lord of the Dance is because he was familiar with this music as part of a ballet. And that's a big reason for the popularity of the hymn, I think, is because Simple Gifts is a great tune. It's beautiful.
Along the same lines, as I get older, not that I'm old, but as I get older, words change meaning in popular culture. And so there are words that the young folks will use now, and I'm like, I know what that word means in the dictionary, but I get the feeling that you're not using it that way, that means, when my kids started saying that's sick. Okay, no one is vomiting, so that's not what we're talking about. What is this? That's the feeling I have with this hymn, that like there's something else going on under the surface and I'm just missing it. And so I'm going, like, it's not even like the dancing offends me necessarily. I'm just kind of left going, what are we talking about? I don't get it. What's going on? I'm confused.
So what Lauren is speculating is that maybe dance is something in here that has changed meaning from the 1960s until now, and so this leaves us kind of cold. And that maybe, I'm not aware of any meaning shift like that, but it's possible. Anything, Landon?
Not a meaning shift, but the picture that we get in our minds when you say someone is dancing is probably a lot different for us, having, a lot of us having come out of the 90s and the 2000s versus someone in 1963 coming out of the 40s and the 50s. We often think of dancing now as being provocative, whereas it's possible then that dancing was more celebratory. And we talked about how we don't have an example of Jesus dancing, but there's a lot in this tune about things that Jesus did as part of his work that were offensive to others. We do have an example of David dancing in a way that was rejoicing before the Lord that was offensive to Saul's daughter. So there's also a possible tie back there as well. Though it would be very loose and you would have to talk to the author to know that's what they were getting
Yes.
at.
What Landon is doing is speculating, first of all, if dancing meant something very different in like the 1950s than it does now. I'm a little skeptical on that one because I suspect that if we were to go back and look at sermon manuscripts of sermons that brethren preached in the 1950s, I mean, some of y'all can back me up here, I am pretty sure that they would be filled with denunciations of dancing as an ungodly practice, probably more even than we would today. But Landon's second point is, it's interesting that this is talking about a lot of the things that Jesus did that offended the Pharisees, which maybe is kind of like David dancing when he offended his wife Michal. And so, maybe there's a scriptural tie-in there. But you notice how hard we are having to work to figure out, why in the world is this thing in this hymn? So that's a puzzlement. Anything else on Lord of the Dance? All right, let's go on to the. Okay, sorry, Rick.
I remember reading a book called The Outsiders and the Socials and the Greasers and stuff, and when they got into a gang fight, they said, let's dance. So, looking at the year that the song was written, like Bobby said, the word terminology, let's dance, is probably what he's talking about fighting. But today, I read this, and I read some of the different verses, especially with the scribes, and I'm picturing Jesus, like the Soul Train line, with Jesus dancing down the middle. So, in today's age, the song doesn't work, in a worship song.
That's it.
And, people understood that terminology, the way that the word dance is used in this song, but today, like Landon said, our minds, we're not there thinking about fighting. We're thinking about Jesus cutting the rug.
Yeah, that's interesting. What Rick said, and this is not one I've read, so that you have the advantage of me there, is that he read a book from that era, in which Let's Dance was used as an invitation to fight. That this is conflict. So you might have that in that time interjected into the way that people were thinking about this. But today, that sort of metaphorical meaning of dance has dropped out entirely. Joe?
If I bring up Wikipedia?
Sure, bring up Wikipedia.
Okay.
Somebody has been Googling.
Hey, if you don't know, you need to check it out before you say something. So it says in writing the lyrics to The Lord of the Dance, Carter was inspired partly by Jesus, but also by a statue of the Hindu deity Shiva as Nataraja, the dancing pose, which is sitting on his desk. So that's where the dancing comes from. This really should not be sung in any congregations anyway.
Ooh, that's really interesting. For those who can't hear Joe way on the other side of the auditorium, what Joe has done is, my brother-in-law likes to say, whenever we're at a family gathering and we're just discussing some issue, he always likes to say, well, too bad we don't have this device in our pockets that could tell us the answer. And so what Joe has done is he has consulted the device in his pocket that has the answer. And he has looked up the Wikipedia page for this hymn. And what Joe said is that in writing this, Sidney Carter was inspired by literally an idol statue that he had on his desk, a statue of a Hindu deity called Shiva Maharaja, which, as I recall, means Shiva, Lord of Lords. And Shiva is the Hindu god of destruction. And the way that Shiva brings about the end of the world is by dancing. So really what we have going on here is some idolatrous syncretism, is what this author had in his mind as he was writing these things. So, well then, maybe let's not sing about Shiva. We already have the little prayer wheel turning and little talk with Jesus. I don't particularly care for that, and I certainly wouldn't care for this. Oh, sorry, I broke my own rule. Although usually we don't sing the version that still has the prayer wheel in it. But anyway, Landon?
That, if we forget about that for just a moment, the main problem with this song is he's describing Jesus doing something that Jesus never did that we know of. And so anytime you do that, it's completely open to individual interpretation by each person singing it as what it means. There's nothing shared in singing this about what it means overall. because there's no example of Jesus dancing.
That's a great point. What Landon said is that, even though now we know the sort of the grim truth about Lord of the Dance and what's really going on here, if we don't know this, it's so vague that we can't really have fellowship in what we're singing, because who knows what anybody is meaning. Bobby is sitting there and she's meaning life, and Rick is over here and he's meaning content, and maybe there's some dude in the back who's meaning idolatry and refusing to sing it. And we're not coming together in worship because there is no core scriptural idea. And there, I think, Landon, you're touching on a larger problem, which is hymns where the content is so vague that it's like a Rorschach blot, that rather than drawing meaning from the hymn, you are just imposing your own meaning on it. And everybody has their own shared meaning, and who has any idea what the guy who is listening to you sing thinks you're singing? So that's an astute observation, Landon. Anybody else here? Let's move on then and talk about Holy Jesus. And if you'll recall, I think I've said this before, as I was going through, I was looking for 4 categories of hymns to fill this notebook with. I wanted good old, all these are unfamiliar. I wanted good old hymns. I wanted bad old hymns. I wanted good new hymns, and I wanted bad new hymns. Of those 4 categories, the one that I had the easiest time filling was good new hymns that we don't sing. The category that I had the hardest time filling was good old hymns that we don't sing. And here we are running into one of the reasons why it is hard to go to hymnary.org, which is like 15,000 hymns on it, and find something on there that is old and good, and yet we don't sing it. And this is part of the reason why. Because if you look at sort of the metadata right under the title, who wrote this thing, is what we have in front of us the original? Is this the original language in which this was written? No. That what we have in front of us is an 1897, so we're talking old, translation of a hymn that was written in 1630 in German by a guy named Johann Heermann. And, I've done this. I've translated hymns from German to English. And it's hard because German just sort of has a different linguistic structure than English does. And you have all these feminine rhymes. I won't go down that rabbit hole. I won't explain why it's hard. But trust me, it's hard to get a hymn from German to English. And so, Ben is absolutely right to pick up on how a lot of this is harder to understand than it should be. In fact, the version that we have in front of us is easier. You notice how it uses you. This is actually a version that I pulled from a hymnal that we don't use. And what the hymnal editors did is they took this hymn, which was originally written with thee and thou, and so you had all of the archaic verbs too, and they put it in, and they used modern pronouns, you, to make it easier to understand. So this is the easier to understand version on the screen in front of us, but it's still hard. So I think it is fair to acknowledge that debit, that when we're talking about good old hymns, a lot of the ones that we still sing, we sing because unlike most of the other hymns from that time, they have intuitive language. Like back to When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. First two lines, when I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died. Is that the way we talk? Does that sound conversational? Don doesn't think so. I think it's pretty close. Probably what we would say, when I am looking at the cross where Jesus died. So even then, with something that we know what it means, we're used to worshiping with, there's still that slight distance there. But here, there's a lot more distance. But something else that Ben also said, and that I agree with, is the content here. Because once you put in the work to kind of untangle the sentence, is there good stuff in here that is very worth singing about? Yes, there is. And when it came to Lord of the Dance, was there was distracting content, stuff that just sort of like blew it all up for us once we figured out what was going on? Is there content here that just blows it all up for us, where we say, no, I can't sing that, that's not true, that's weird? That's not what we have going on either. Instead, everything that we see in here is something that is both true and good once we drill down into it. Particularly, I want to, in the few minutes we have left, to pay attention to verses 3 and 4. And my favorite lines in this are the first two lines of verse 3. Why am I zeroing in on this? What's useful about lo, the good shepherd, for the sheep is offered? And notice, by the way, here we have that twisting around the syntax again. Because would we say, lo, the good shepherd, for the sheep is offered? We wouldn't. We would say, lo, the good shepherd is offered for the sheep. So why did he do that? Well, why did he twist that around like that? Yep, because he's trying to rhyme. That's it. There was a rhyme in the original, and so he kind of went Yoda a little bit to hit his rhyme. But how about this idea of the good shepherd being offered for the sheep? Is that a spiritually important idea? Yes, because who are we talking about? We're talking about Jesus being offered for us. We're his sheep. And is that how you would expect things to go? That the shepherd would be offered for the sheep? Or is it the shepherd who is going to take his sheep and sacrifice one of them? Yeah, so this is one where it says, here's what Jesus did, and it's the opposite of what we would expect. And how about the slave has sinned and yet the son has suffered? That one's straightforward, isn't it? We don't have twisted language. But is that what we would expect? Because I think we've all heard the story of the whipping boy, right? Where you have like the prince who had his little playmate, and whenever the prince did wrong, it was the whipping boy who got it instead of the prince. So this is saying the opposite, isn't it? That we were the slave, we were the one who wasn't important, and yet the one who was important suffered in our place. So we have here a hymn with difficult syntax, but good content. And I think that's where we'll leave it. Thank you all for your comments. This is a really good discussion.